Nobody wants that. The auctioneer laughed at the obese girl as the whole town roared with cruel laughter. But when a giant rancher stepped out of the dust and dropped his last silver dollar, the street went silent. With one bold act, he claimed the girl no one wanted, shocking the crowd and setting fire to whispers across the frontier. At first, it looked like a simple rescue. A warm bed, a plate of food, safe place on a lonely ranch. But out in those hills, secrets don't stay buried. This girl carries a hidden claim that could save or destroy the ranch itself. The railroad wants the water. Hired guns circle like wolves. And the only thing standing between ruin and redemption is a girl the world mocked as worthless. Will the rancher's faith and her courage be enough to silence the laughter forever? Or will the frontier chew them both to pieces before the truth can be spoken? Before we begin, share a piece of your world in the comments. Your city, your energy. It's a powerful thing, being part of something bigger than ourselves. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps of Silver Bluff, stretching like dark fingers across the dusty ground. A crowd of townsfolk pressed close, their expressions a mix of curiosity and cruel anticipation. The air hung heavy with tobacco smoke and the metallic temps of the nearby railroad. Auctioneer Silas Bragg strutted across the wooden platform, his vest straining against his belly as he gestured dramatically. His voice carried across the square, sharp and mocking. "Step right up, good people of Silver Bluff. We've got young ones ready for work, ready to earn their keep." One by one, children shuffled forward, their faces drawn and pale. Ranch wives in plain cotton dresses whispered among themselves. Merchants in shop-worn suits nodded thoughtfully, calculating the worth of small hands for their businesses. Miners stood at the edges, their faces shadowed under dirt-crusted hats. At last, Bragg roughly pulled Evelyn onto the platform. She stumbled forward, her worn boots scuffing against the rough wood. Her ill-fitting dress hung loose on her heavy frame, patched at the elbows and frayed at the hem. She kept her eyes down, her cheeks burning red as she felt dozens of stares boring into her. "Well, well," Bragg's voice dripped with mockery. "Look what we have here. A big one, folks." He circled Evelyn like a predator. "This might eat you out of house and home, but I reckon she could do the work of two." The crowd responded with harsh laughter, the sound cutting through Evelyn like knives. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them back. She'd learned long ago that crying only made the taunts worse. Her hands twisted in her skirt as Bragg continued his cruel performance. "Come now, surely someone needs a strong back. Though you might need to reinforce your wagon to cart her home." More laughter erupted, and Evelyn's shoulders hunched further, trying to make herself smaller. Impossible as that was. "Nobody wants that one," a voice called from the crowd, triggering another wave of cruel mirth. Bragg's face twisted in an exaggerated grimace. "Well, folks, looks like we might have to send this one back." "Can't say as I blame you. I'll take her." The deep voice cut through the laughter like a blade. The crowd parted, revealing a tall figure at the back. Ephraim Boone stepped forward, his weathered boots striking the packed earth with purpose. His broad shoulders, clad in a clean but worn denim jacket, seemed to fill the space as he approached the platform. The laughter died instantly. Everyone knew Boone, the widowed rancher who kept to himself, whose word was as solid as the mountains themselves. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man who needed no one's approval. Bragg's showman's smile faltered. "Now, Mr. Boone, surely you'd prefer I said, 'I'll take her'?" Ephraim's voice was quiet, but carried the weight of iron. He reached into his pocket and pulled out $2 silver, laying them deliberately on the platform. The coins gleamed in the late afternoon light. Silence fell over the crowd. Evelyn dared to lift her eyes, meeting Ephraim's steady gaze for just a moment. There was no mockery there, no cruel amusement, just calm certainty. Bragg cleared his throat, his earlier bravado withering under Boone's steady stare. "Well then, she's yours." He snatched up the coins quickly, as if afraid Boone might change his mind. Ephraim turned to Evelyn, his movement unhurried. "Come along, girl." His voice was gruff, but not unkind. He offered his hand to help her down from the platform. Evelyn hesitated just a moment before taking it. His palm was calloused but warm, and his grip was sure as he helped her down. The crowd parted further as Ephraim led her to where his wagon waited. The wooden wheels dusty from the trail. The sun was sinking toward the horizon now, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Evelyn climbed into the wagon, the wooden seat creaking beneath her. She kept her eyes fixed on her hands folded in her lap, still waiting for the other shoe to drop, for some new cruelty to emerge. But Ephraim simply climbed up beside her, gathered the reins, and clicked softly to his team of horses. The wagon wheels turned, carrying them away from the courthouse, away from the staring eyes and cruel laughter as they rolled past the last buildings of Silver Bluff. Evelyn stole another glance at her unlikely savior. His profile was stern in the fading light, but there was something solid about him, something that spoke of deep roots and quiet strength. For the first time in longer than she could remember, a tiny spark of hope flickered in her chest. Behind them, the sun sank lower, stretching their shadows long across the dusty road leading out of town. The wagon creaked steadily onward, carrying Evelyn toward an uncertain future, but one that, perhaps, held something better than what she'd left behind. The wagon wheels creaked as Ephraim guided his team out of Silver Bluff. Twilight painted the sky in deep purples and blues, the first stars beginning to peek through the darkening canopy above. Evelyn sat rigid on the wooden bench, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Each bump and jostle of the wagon made her tense further, wondering if she had merely traded one form of cruelty for another. The sounds of the town faded behind them. No more shouting, no more laughter, just the steady clip-clop of hooves and the gentle squeak of leather harness. The cooling air carried the scent of sage and dust, mixing with the earthy smell of horses. Ephraim cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "There'll be work," he said, his voice low and steady. "Chores need doing, same as anywhere." He paused, adjusting the reins in his weathered hands. "But you'll have good food, clean bed, and no one to mock you. That's a promise." Evelyn darted a glance at his profile, trying to read truth or lies in his expression. His face remained calm, eyes fixed on the trail ahead. He had learned early that men's promises often turned to dust. But something in his quiet tone made her want to believe as darkness settled fully around them. Ephraim guided the wagon off the main trail. "We'll camp here tonight," he said, pulling the team to a halt beside a small creek, too dark to press on safely. He helped her down from the wagon, his movements careful but not lingering. Soon a small fire crackled, pushing back the darkness. Ephraim moved with practiced efficiency, setting up camp while a pot of stew bubbled over the flames. The stars emerged in force now, scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. Evelyn sat on a fallen log, watching as Ephraim filled a tin bowl with steaming stew and handed it to her along with a spoon. "Eat your fill," he said simply, before serving himself and settling on the other end of the log. They ate in silence, but it wasn't the tense quiet of threat. Ephraim focused on his own meal, never staring or making her feel watched. No snide comments about her appetite, no meaningful looks when she accepted a second helping. Just simple courtesy, as if she were any other person sharing his fire. Dawn found them back on the trail, the wagon rattling along highland roads that wound ever deeper into the country. Evelyn found her gaze drawn to the land around them. Pine-covered ridges rose in waves, their dark green branches swaying in the morning. Breeze, clear creeks tumbled over rocks in narrow valleys, and occasional meadows spread like green pools among the trees. "It's hard country," Ephraim said, nodding toward a steep slope where young pines were fighting to grow. "Ranching here takes grit. Calves freeze in spring storms. Wolves come down hungry in winter. Some years the snow lies deep enough to starve. Both beast and man." He spoke matter-of-factly, neither bragging nor complaining. "But it's good land, if you're willing to work with it instead of against it." The sun climbed toward afternoon as they followed the winding trail. Finally, they crested a hill, and Ephraim drew the wagon to a halt. "There it is," he said quietly. Below them spread a small valley, sheltered by rising hills. A solid timber house stood in the center, its walls weathered to a soft gray. A barn stretched behind it, with corrals spreading out from its sides. A thin line of smoke rose from the stone chimney, dancing in the afternoon light. A creek sparkled through the valley, its banks lined with willows, and beyond the house lay fenced pastures where cattle grazed. "It's not much," Ephraim said, his voice holding neither pride nor apology, "but it's honest." The wagon rolled down into the valley, coming to rest before the house. Ephraim stepped down first, then helped Evelyn from the bench. Before she could reach for her small satchel containing the few possessions she'd been allowed to keep from the orphanage, he carried it toward the house as if it were something of value, not the meager bundle. It was. Evelyn followed, her feet hesitant on the packed earth of the yard. The house's windows gleamed clean in the afternoon sun, and a row of flowers grew along one wall. Their faces turned toward the light. Ephraim opened the door, stepping aside to let her enter first. The interior was simple but well kept, with a plank floor swept clean and curtains at the windows. A black cook stove dominated one wall, and a wooden table with 4 chairs stood in the center of the room. "Your room's this way," he said, leading her to a small but bright chamber off the main room. A narrow bed with a clean quilt stood against one wall, a chest of drawers against another. A window looked out toward the mountains, letting in streams of afternoon light. Ephraim set her satchel carefully on the bed, then stepped back. "Get settled in," he said. "I'll see to the horses." He paused at the door, adding quietly, "Welcome home, Evelyn." She stood in the center of the small room after he left, running her fingers over the smooth wood of the dresser. Outside the window, she could see the mountains rising against the sky, solid and unchanging. For the first time since the auction block, her shoulders began to relax, the constant tension easing just a fraction. This place, with its clean windows and swept floors, its flowers reaching for the sun, and its quiet rancher who carried her satchel, as if it mattered perhaps here. She wasn't unwanted after all, inside the cabin. Golden lamplight spilled across worn floorboards, casting warm shadows on the timber walls. Evelyn stood just inside the door, her shoulders hunched as if trying to make herself smaller. She'd seen this before at other homes, the moment when she'd be directed to some dusty corner of a barn or a drafty loft, wherever unwanted folk belonged. Ephraim lit a second lamp, its flame steady and bright. "This way," he said, moving down a short hallway. He pushed open a door, holding the lamp high so she could see inside. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. A real bedroom lay before her, small but clean, with whitewashed walls and a window draped in faded blue curtains. Narrow beds stood against one wall, topped with a carefully pieced quilt in shades of red and cream. A simple wooden washstand held a white basin and pitcher, and beside it stood a chest of drawers, its surface polished smooth. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. Never in all her 15 years had she had a space to call her own. At the orphanage, she'd slept in a crowded dormitory wedged between other unwanted girls who whispered cruel things in the dark. "It's yours," Ephraim said quietly, setting the lamp on the dresser. Get settled while I start supper." Evelyn stepped into the room, afraid it might disappear like morning mist. Her fingers traced the quilt's careful stitches, feeling the solid reality of it. The window looked east toward the mountains, and a small shelf beneath it held 3 books with unbroken spines. The smell of coffee and frying bacon drew her eventually to the kitchen. Ephraim had set 2 places at the wooden table reel plates. Not the chipped leftovers she was used to, and actual metal forks instead of wooden spoons. A loaf of fresh bread sat between them, still warm from baking. Before sitting, Ephraim bowed his head. "Lord," he said simply, "thank you for new help and new mercies. Amen." He passed her the bread first, as if she were an honored guest instead of a charity case. Evelyn's hands trembled as she filled her plate. Real food, not kitchen scraps or burned leftover tender bacon. Fluffy biscuits, eggs cooked just right. She ate carefully at first, then with growing hunger as Ephraim showed no sign of mockery or judgment. After the meal, as they washed dishes together in comfortable quiet, Ephraim outlined her duties. "Garden needs tending," he said, handing her a dried plate. "Chickens need feeding and eggs gathering. Some mending too, when there's time." He paused, looking at her directly. "You're no one's servant here, understand? We both work. We both eat. That's how it is." Later, lying in her new bed, Evelyn stared into the darkness. The silence pressed around Herno's snoring dormitory. No whispered taunts, no creaking floorboards from restless children. Just the soft song of crickets through her window and the occasional low of cattle in the distance. The quilt wrapped her in unexpected warmth. And for the first time she could remember, she felt something like safety. Dawn arrived with a rooster's proud crow. Evelyn woke instantly, years of habit bringing her alert. She dressed quickly in the gray morning light and slipped outside. The air held the crisp bite of mountain morning, dew sparkling on grass and fence rails. She found the chicken coop easily enough, gathering eggs in the basket Ephraim had left by the door. Some hens pecked at her hands, but she didn't mind. She dealt with worse. The eggs were still warm as she collected them, ranging from deep brown to pale cream. "Good morning." Ephraim's voice startled her as she emerged from the coop. He stood by the barn door, already dressed for the day's work. His eyes fell on her basket of eggs. "That's fine work," he said, nodding approval. "You've got a willing spirit about you. That matters more than knowing everything right away." Evelyn ducked her head, unused to praise that focused on her character, rather than her appearance or failures. They walked back to the house together, the morning sun painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold. The porch steps creaked as they sat down, the egg basket between them. Steam rose from the coffee cups Ephraim had brought out. Evelyn wrapped her hands around the warm tin mug, watching as color flooded the eastern sky. "I can't believe it," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "A real bed. My own room." Her voice caught slightly. "Never had that before." Ephraim sipped his coffee, his eyes on the distant mountains. "Everyone deserves a place to belong," he said simply, "a spot to call their own." The sun crested the hills, throwing long shadows across the yard. New day was beginning on the ranch, and for the first time in her life, Evelyn faced it knowing she had somewhere to return when the work was done, room with a window, a bed with a quilt, and a place where she might, just might, now belong. Morning dew clung to Evelyn's skirts as she crossed the yard, 2 heavy water buckets swinging at her sides. The metal handles bit into her palms and water sloshed over her boots. Halfway to the house, her grip faltered. The buckets hit the ground with a splash, soaking the dusty earth. "I'm sorry," she called out, seeing Ephraim look up from the corral. Her cheeks burned with shame, but Ephraim just set down his hammer and walked over, his stride unhurried. "No harm done," he said, demonstrating how to carry the buckets. Keep your arms straight. Let your shoulders do the work. Your size gives you strength. Use it. Evelyn tried again, copying his posture. This time she made it to the house, arms trembling but grip firm. In the kitchen, she filled the dish basin and the big cooking pot. The morning's small victory gave her courage to try biscuits, though her first batch burned black on the bottom. "We'll eat them anyway," Ephraim said, taking a bite without complaint. Food's not to be wasted. Later that morning, they tackled the broken corral post together. Ephraim showed her how to brace the new timber while he hammered it secure. Work was hard, but Evelyn found herself enjoying the simple rhythm of it. Her strong arms, so often a source of mockery, proved useful in steadying the heavy post. "Good," Ephraim nodded when they finished. "Now we ride." Evelyn's heart jumped. She'd never been on a horse before. Ephraim let out a steady brown mare. Helping her mount, the saddle felt strange, but her legs gripped naturally. They rode out together, checking the cattle scattered across green pastures. The spring air carried the scent of sage and pine, and overhead, hawks circled on thermal winds. Back at the ranch, Ephraim taught her to swing an axe. "Kindling needs splitting," he explained, showing her the proper stance. Her first attempts went wide, but soon she found her rhythm. The satisfying crack of wood splitting filled the yard. A week passed in similar fashion each day, bringing new tasks, new skills to master. Evelyn dropped things sometimes, struggled with fine work like darning, but Ephraim's patience never wavered. He showed her how to mend mistakes without shame, how to try again without fear. Then came the supply run to town. Evelyn's stomach knotted. As their wagon rattled down Silver Bluff's main street, she felt the stares, heard the whispers. Two women outside the mercantile turned their heads together, giggling behind their hands. "Brought home the big one, didn't you, Boone?" called a man from the saloon porch. Laughter rippled through the street. Evelyn hunched her shoulders, trying to disappear. But Ephraim's hand settled briefly on her arm, steady and warm. He said nothing to the mockers, treating their words like meaningless wind. His silence somehow held more dignity than any retort, while Ephraim spoke with the supply clerk inside the store. Evelyn waited by the wagon. Three rough-looking men lounged nearby, not noticing her presence behind the stacked crates. "Boone's Creek is the key," one said, lighting a cigarette. "Railroad needs that water right of way. Won't sell, though," another replied. "Man's stubborn as they come. Don't matter what he wants. Railroad gets what railroad needs." Evelyn's hands trembled as she pretended to check the wagon's tie-downs. The men's words carried threat beneath their casual tone. She wanted to tell Ephraim, but fear closed her throat. What if he sent her away for bringing trouble? The ride home was quiet, the wagon loaded with flour, sugar, and other supplies. Ephraim broke the silence only once. "Thank you for your help loading today. Couldn't have managed those heavy sacks alone." Evelyn nodded, still thinking about the creek that ran through Ephraim's land. Clear water tumbling over rocks, feeding the cattle, nurturing gardens. Why did the railroad want it so badly? The question gnawed at her as evening settled over the ranch, but she kept her worry silent, helping with supper instead. That night, she lay awake in her room, listening to the creek's distant murmur. The sound that had become comfort now carried a note of warning. Outside her window, an owl called into the darkness, its cry lonely and uncertain. Rain drummed steadily on the cabin's cedar-shake roof as Evelyn sat cross-legged on her bed. Her old canvas satchel lay open before her, containing everything she owned from her years at the orphanage. The lamplight cast a warm glow as she sorted through the meager collection: 2 worn dresses, a frayed hair ribbon, a small wooden comb. Missing teeth, her fingers brushed something stiff in the satchel's deepest pocket. Curious, she reached in and pulled out several folded papers, yellow with age and creased from long storage. Her heart skipped when she saw the name scrawled across the top: Thomas Wallace. Her father? Evelyn's hands trembled as she carefully unfolded the brittle pages. The writing was formal, filled with legal terms she couldn't understand. But there, clear as day, was her father's signature at the bottom. She traced it with her finger, remembering his calloused hands, the smell of coal dust that always clung to his clothes before the mine accident took him. Thunder rumbled outside as she gathered the papers close. Should she show them to Ephraim? The thought of revealing anything from her past made her stomach twist. But these documents seemed important. Rising from the bed, she patted down the hallway in her stockinged feet. Ephraim sat at the kitchen table, mending a piece of tack by lamplight. He looked up as she approached, his weathered face questioning. "I found these," Evelyn said softly, holding out the papers. "They were my father's." Ephraim wiped his hands on a rag and took the documents carefully. His eyes moved across the pages, brow furrowing in concentration. The rain's steady patter filled the silence as he read. "Evelyn," he said finally, voice grave, "do you know what these are?" She shook her head. "These are water rights filings for Silver Bluff Creek. Your father registered a legal claim to portions of the waterway, dated 1872. Ephraim spread the papers reverently on the table. "This creek, it's the same one that runs through my land." Evelyn sank into a chair, trying to understand. "What does that mean?" "It means," Ephraim said slowly, "that your father secured legal rights to this water before anyone else, before the railroad, before me, even." He looked at her intently. These papers could stop the railroad from taking control of the creek. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating Evelyn's stunned face. But how? The railroad's been trying to seize water rights all along Silver Bluff Creek. Without water access, ranchers like me can't survive. We'd have to sell our land cheap. Ephraim tapped the documents. "But your father's claim predates their interests. It could protect not just my ranch, but others too." Hope flickered in Ephraim's eyes, but then his expression sobered. "There's something you need to understand, though. To make this claim stand in court, you'd have to present it yourself. As your father's heir, only you have the right." The hope in Evelyn's chest withered. "Me? Stand in court?" Her voice quavered. "In front of everyone?" "Yes." Ephraim's voice was gentle. "You'd have to testify about these documents, prove they're genuine." Evelyn's hands clenched in her lap. The thought of standing before the townspeople who had laughed at her, mocked her size, dismissed her as worthless made her want to hide. She could already hear their sneers, see their pointing fingers. "I can't," she whispered. "They'll only laugh. Listen to me, Evelyn." Ephraim reached across the table and clasped her shoulder, his grip firm but kind. "These rights are yours by blood and law. Nobody can laugh that away. Not the railroad, not the town, not anyone." Thunder rolled again, closer now. Rain lashed the windows as Evelyn stared at the papers that connected her to a father she'd lost too young. She remembered his voice, how he'd tell her stories of the land, how water was more precious than gold out here. Had he filed these claims, knowing someday she might need them? "What if I fail?" she asked, voicing her deepest fear. "Then we fail trying to do what's right," Ephraim answered simply. "But I don't reckon you will. Not you're stronger than you know." Evelyn touched the papers, feeling their weight not just in her hands, but on her spirit. All her life she'd tried to be invisible, to hide from cruel eyes and mocking voices. But now, somehow, she held something important. Something that mattered not just to her, but to Ephraim and other ranchers who depended on the creek's life-giving water. The storm raged outside, but in the lamp's warm glow, Evelyn felt something new stirring in her heart. Not quite courage, not yet. But perhaps it's beginning like a small seed taking root in soil long barren. She looked at her father's signature again, then at Ephraim's steady presence across the table. The papers trembled slightly in her hands as two paths stretched before her: remain invisible and safe, or stand up and speak her truth before those who had hurt her. Lightning flashed again, throwing their shadows against the cabin walls. In that bright moment, Evelyn felt the weight of destiny settling around her shoulders, heavy, frightening. But somehow, morning mist clung to the meadow grass as Ephraim hitched the horses to the wagon. The tin box containing Evelyn's precious documents rested beside him on the bench seat, secured with twine. He had polished it the night before until it gleamed, treating the contents with the reverence they deserved. Evelyn emerged from the cabin wearing her best dress, faded but clean, pressed carefully the evening before. Her face was pale in the dawn light, but her chin held steady. She had barely touched her breakfast, her stomach too knotted with nerves to eat. "Ready?" Ephraim asked softly as she climbed up beside him. She nodded, clutching her shawl tight around her shoulders, despite the mild morning air. The tin box between them felt like it contained dynamite rather than paper, something that could change everything in an instant. The wagon wheels creaked as they set out, following the winding trail down from the highlands toward Silver Bluff. Ephraim kept the horses at an easy pace, knowing they had left early enough to reach town well before the courthouse opened. Every so often he glanced at Evelyn, noting how she sat straighter as they drew closer to town, as if gathering her courage. "Remember," he said, as the first buildings came into view, "you have nothing to be ashamed of. These are your father's legal filings. The law's on your side." "Yes, sir," Evelyn whispered. But her hands twisted in her lap. They reached Silver Bluff just as the town was coming alive. Shop owners swept their boardwalks, and the smell of fresh bread wafted from the bakery. A few early risers paused too, watched the wagon pass, their gazes lingering on Evelyn with puzzled recognition. Ephraim tied the horses outside the courthouse, then lifted down the tin box with careful hands. Evelyn descended slowly, her feet feeling leaden as they climbed the courthouse steps. Inside, the building smelled of dust and old paper. Their boots echoed on the wooden floor as they approached the clerk's desk. "We need to see Judge Callahan," Ephraim stated. "It's regarding water rights on Silver Bluff Creek." The clerk peered at them over his spectacles, then disappeared into the judge's chambers. Moments later, he beckoned them inside. Judge Horace Callahan sat behind his massive oak desk, stern and imposing in his black coat. His gray eyes settled first on Ephraim, then moved to Evelyn, who fought the urge to shrink behind her guardian. "What's this about creek rights, Boone?" the judge asked. Ephraim placed the tin box on the desk. "Sir, these documents were found in the possession of my ward, Evelyn Wallace. They're water rights filings made by her father, Thomas Wallace, in 1872. The judge's eyebrows rose slightly as he opened the box. By now, other townspeople had begun filtering into the courthouse for the day's business. They lingered near the door, watching with undisguised curiosity. Callahan examined the papers with meticulous care, holding them up to the morning light streaming through his window. The silence stretched until Evelyn thought she might break from the tension. "These appear genuine," the judge finally declared. "The seals and signatures are correct. The filing dates precede any other claims on that waterway." He looked at Evelyn directly. "Young lady, do you understand what these documents represent?" Evelyn swallowed hard, feeling every eye in the room upon her. "Yes, Your Honor," she managed, her voice stronger than she expected. "My father filed legal claim to portions of Silver Bluff Creek before he died." A murmur rippled through the growing crowd. Evelyn heard the whispers. The orphan girl? That heavy one from the auction. But for once, there was no laughter. only surprise and something like respect. As Thomas Wallace's sole heir, the judge continued, "These rights would indeed pass to you." He shuffled through the papers again. "Given the clear precedence of these filings, I'll take the matter under review. But I see no reason why your claim shouldn't be upheld." Relief flooded through Evelyn so strongly her knees nearly buckled. Ephraim's hand appeared at her elbow, steadying her. "Thank you, Your Honor," Ephraim said formally. The judge nodded, already making notes in his ledger. As they turned to leave, Evelyn felt the weight of stares from the townspeople gathered in the courthouse. But these looks were different from before measuring, considering. She was no longer just the unwanted orphan. She was someone who controlled something valuable, someone whose word could affect their futures. Outside in the morning sunshine, Ephraim squeezed her shoulder. Pride shone in his eyes. "Well done," he said simply. They still needed supplies. So they walked to the mercantile. The store owner, who had previously ignored Evelyn, now greeted her with a careful good morning, "Miss Wallace." Others on the boardwalk offered polite nods where before they had sneered or looked away. Ephraim loaded their purchases while Evelyn stood by the wagon, marveling at how different everything felt. The same sun shone down. The same dust swirled in the street, but she was changed. She had stood before the judge, spoken her truth, and been heard. The ride home seemed shorter somehow. As they crested the final hill, the afternoon sun caught the cabin's windows, making them gleam like welcome beacons. The creek, her creek now, in parts sparkled as it wound through the pastures. That evening, Evelyn helped prepare their usual supper of beef stew and cornbread. The familiar tasks settled her racing thoughts. They ate by lamplight, the tin box with her father's papers sitting in a place of honor on the shelf. "I'm grateful," Ephraim said quietly as they finished their meal, "for your courage today. Standing up ain't easy, especially when folks have been unkind before." Evelyn ducked her head, touched by his words. "I was scared," she admitted. "Being scared don't matter none," he replied. "Doing what's right even when you're scared. What counts?" Later, in her little room, Evelyn lay awake for a long time. The cotton quilt was soft around her shoulders, and through her window she could hear the creek's gentle murmur. For the first time, to let herself dream of truly belonging here not as a charity case or unwanted burden, but as someone with purpose and worth, she thought of her father, wondering if he had known, somehow, that these papers would one day help her find her place in the world. As sleep finally came, Evelyn held that hope close to her heart, precious as the water rights themselves. 2 days after their triumph at the courthouse, dawn painted the sky in gentle pinks and golds as Ephraim hitched the horses to the wagon. The morning air held a crisp bite, making their breath visible in small clouds. Evelyn tucked the precious tin box securely beneath the wagon seat, wrapping it in an old blanket for protection. "Beautiful morning for a drive," Ephraim commented, helping Evelyn up onto the wooden seat. His quiet confidence had been a steady presence these past days, grounding her whenever doubt crept in. The wagon wheels creaked as they set out, following the winding trail through stands of towering pines. Shadows dappled the dusty road, and birds called from the branches above. Everything seemed peaceful. Ordinary, just another trip to town to handle paperwork. They were halfway to Silver Bluff when Evelyn first spotted movement among the trees. Her heart skipped as 5 riders emerged from the pines, spreading across the road ahead. Their horses were trailed dusty, their faces hard beneath the brims of their hats. Ephraim's hands tightened on the reins. He drew the wagon to a halt, keeping several yards between them and the blocking riders. "Morning, gentlemen," he called, his voice careful but firm. "Something we can help you with." The lead rider, a weather-beaten man with cold eyes, spurred his horse forward. "Matter of fact, there is." his gaze fixed on the space beneath the wagon seat. "That tin box you're carrying. Hand it over, nice and peaceful-like." Evelyn's blood ran cold. These had to be railroad men, the same ones she had overheard talking about Ephraim's Creek. Her fingers clutched the edge of the seat until her knuckles went white. "I reckon not," Ephraim replied steadily. "Those papers belong to the young lady here. They're headed for the courthouse, proper and legal." A harsh laugh rippled through the group of riders. "Ain't nothing proper about what's fixing to happen if you don't give up that box," the leader drawled. His hand rested meaningfully on the revolver at his hip. "Evelyn," Ephraim said quietly, not taking his eyes off the men, "when I say now, you run for those rocks yonder." He nodded slightly toward a tumble of boulders off the road. Before she could respond, the leader spurred his horse forward. Ephraim lunged up, shoving Evelyn toward the side of the wagon just as the first shot cracked through the morning air. She tumbled into the dust as chaos erupted. More shots split the silence. Horses screamed and reared. Through the confusion, Evelyn saw Ephraim grappling with one of the riders who had reached the wagon. Then came a sound that stopped her heart. Sharp report, followed by Ephraim's grunt of pain. No. The scream tore from her throat as she watched him collapse, crimson blooming across his shirt. The leader of the riders vaulted into the wagon, snatched up the tin box, and wheeled his horse around. "Much obliged." He called mockingly as the group thundered away, leaving dust and destruction in their wake. Evelyn scrambled to her feet, her dress torn and dirty, and ran to where Ephraim lay in the road. Blood seeped from a wound in his side, staining the dust dark beneath him. His face was gray with pain, but his eyes were open. "Got to get back," he managed through gritted teeth. Sobbing and shaking, Evelyn somehow helped him to his feet. Every movement drew a hiss of pain from him as she half-dragged, half-lifted him onto the wagon seat. Her hands were slick with his blood, leaving red smears on everything she touched. The horses, thank God, had not run far. She gathered the reins with trembling fingers and turned them toward home. Every bump and jolt of the wagon drew a groan. From Ephraim, he slumped against her shoulder, his breathing ragged. "Please, God," she prayed aloud, tears streaming down her face. "Please don't take him. Please don't let him die. I'll do anything. Just please." Her prayers became a desperate litany as she urged the horses on. Faster than was wise on the rough trail, the ride that had taken an easy hour that morning now seemed to stretch endlessly. Ephraim's weight grew, heavier against her as his consciousness faded in and out. The front of his shirt was soaked with blood despite her attempts to press her shawl against the wound. When the cabin finally came into view, Evelyn's arms ached from controlling the horses and supporting Ephraim. She pulled up as close to the door as she could, then faced the daunting task of getting him inside. "Ephraim," she pleaded, patting his cheek, "I need your help." "Just a little ways more." He stirred, forcing his eyes open. Together, they managed to get him down from the wagon. Evelyn wrapped her arms around his waist, taking as much of his weight as she could. They staggered the few yards to the cabin door, every step marking their progress with drops of blood in the dust. Inside, she helped him to his bed, then rushed to gather clean cloths and water. Her hands shook as she cut away his shirt, revealing the ugly wound in his side. The bullet had torn through flesh, but hadn't stayed in him small mercy. That she cleaned the wound as best she could, the way she'd learned at the orphanage when smaller children got hurt. Ephraim lay still, his breathing shallow, as she pressed clean cloths against the injury and bound them in place with strips torn from an old sheet. When she had done all she could, Evelyn sank to her knees beside the bed. Night had fallen while she worked, and the cabin was dark except for a single lamp. Ephraim's face was pale in the dim light, his forehead beaded with sweat. The events of the day crashed over her, then the ambush. The stolen papers. Ephraim's. Blood on her hands. Great racking sobs shook her body as she buried her face in her arms. "I'm sorry," she wept. "I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. If I had never shown you those papers," she couldn't finish. The guilt was crushing her, along with the certainty that she had failed the only person who had ever shown her true kindness. Outside, a coyote wailed, long and lonely in the darkness. Evelyn raised her tear-stained face to watch Ephraim shallow, breathing, terrified that each rise of his chest might be the last. She had never felt more alone or more useless in her life. Thunder rumbled overhead as rain drummed against the cabin's tin roof. Inside, Evelyn moved like a shadow in the lamplight, her hands trembling as she lifted another pot of water onto the cook stove. The small room felt suffocating with worry as steam rose from the boiling bandages. Ephraim lay still on his bed, his breathing shallow and uneven. The wound in his side had stopped bleeding, but his skin burned with fever. Evelyn wrung out a cool cloth and pressed it to his forehead, her heart aching at how fragile he looked. This man, who had stood like an oak against the town's cruel laughter, now seemed as vulnerable as a fallen leaf. "Please, Lord," she whispered, dipping the cloth again. "Please help him." The long hours of night crawled by. Every time exhaustion tried to claim her, Evelyn forced herself back to wakefulness. She couldn't sleep, wouldn't sleep, while Ephraim needed her. The rain lashed harder against the windows, and wind moaned through the eaves like a lost soul, as false dawn began to creep through the darkness. Ephraim's fever spiked higher. His skin blazed beneath her touch, and broken words tumbled from his cracked lips. Evelyn's hands shook as she changed his bandages again, fighting back tears at the angry red flesh around the wound. She remembered the judge's face in the courthouse, how he had looked at her with real respect when he saw her father's papers. For one shining moment, she had felt like somebody who mattered. Now those precious documents were gone, stolen by men who thought nothing of spilling blood to get their way. "We're ruined," she whispered to the empty room. "Without those papers, we have nothing." The helplessness threatened to overwhelm her. Needing to move, to do something, Evelyn pulled on Ephraim's old oilskin coat and stepped out onto the porch. Rain pelted her face as she made her way to the woodpile. They would need more wood to keep the stove hot for boiling bandages. She seized the axe, its familiar weight offering some comfort. Each swing became a prayer, a protest, a cry of fury at the injustice of it all. The blade bit deep into the logs as tears mixed with the rain on her face. "This was supposed to be home," she grunted, splitting another piece. "This was supposed to be our chance." When her arms could barely lift the axe anymore, Evelyn gathered the split wood and carried it inside. She fed the stove, then sank to her knees beside Ephraim's bed. Her sodden skirts left puddles on the plank floor, but she didn't care. "Lord," she prayed, her voice breaking, "why would you give me a place if I can't hold on to it? Why show me belonging just to have it stolen? Away, paper, don't make you strong." The weak whisper startled her. Ephraim's eyes were open, fever bright but focused on her face. "Truth does," he finished, each word an effort. Evelyn caught his hand, pressing it between both of hers. "Save your strength," she pleaded, but his fingers tightened slightly on hers. "Remember that," he insisted. Before his eyes drifted closed again, those 4 words lodged in her heart like seeds taking root. She clung to them as she tended him through the long day, changing cool cloths, coaxing water between his lips, whispering hymns her mother had taught her long ago. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. The rain continued its steady drumming on the roof. Evelyn moved between the stove and bedside. Her world narrowed to this rhythm of care. She heated broth and managed to get Ephraim to swallow a few spoonfuls. She boiled more bandages and gently cleaned his wound. She prayed without ceasing, her lips moving silently as she worked. As evening approached, she noticed a change. Skin felt cooler beneath her touch, his breathing more even. The fever hadn't broken completely, but its fierce grip seemed to be loosening at last. Hope flickered in her chest like a candle flame. Exhaustion crashed over her then, 2 days and nights of worry exacting their toll. Evelyn's head felt too heavy to hold up, meant to rest for just a moment, leaning against the quilt beside Ephraim's bed. But her eyes closed of their own accord, and sleep pulled her under like a swift current. Her last conscious thought was of Ephraim's words, "Truth does." Maybe he was right. Maybe there was strength in something deeper than paper and ink, something that couldn't be stolen away by men with guns. The truth of who she was, who he was, what they meant to each other, that was real. That was strong. Rain whispered against the roof as Evelyn slept, her head resting against the quilt, her hand still holding Ephraim's. Outside, the storm began to ease, but inside the cabin, two souls weathered the darkness together, bound by something stronger than any legal claim. Morning sunlight streamed through the cabin windows, painting golden squares on the wooden floor. Evelyn stirred from her awkward position beside Ephraim's bed, her neck stiff from sleeping against the quilt. She blinked, momentarily disoriented, then remembered everything: the ambush, the stolen papers, the desperate hours of nursing. Ephraim's face was peaceful now, his breathing steady. When she touched his forehead, his skin felt cool and dry. The fever had finally broken during the night. Relief flooded through her as she watched his chest rise and fall in normal rhythm. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, smoothing the blanket. Over him, outside the world, glistened from yesterday's rain. Roosters crowed impatiently, reminding her that ranch work wouldn't wait, even for heartache. Evelyn straightened her wrinkled skirts and headed out to face the morning chores. The familiar weight of the milk pail settled in her hand as she approached the barn. Inside, the cow lowed a greeting, udder heavy and ready. Evelyn settled onto the milking stool, working with steady hands. The warm streams hitting the bucket created a gentle rhythm that soothed her worried mind. Next came the chickens, clucking and pecking around her feet as she scattered feed. She gathered eggs, noting with satisfaction that her movements were sure and practiced now. No more dropped eggs or nervous fumbling at the well. Evelyn gripped the pump handle and began working it up and down. Water gushed forth, filling bucket after bucket. She remembered how this task had once left her gasping and trembling. Now her arms barely noticed the strain. She carried 2 full buckets at once, water barely sloshing as she walked. Throughout the morning, she moved between tasks with growing confidence. Feed the animals, check the garden, chop more wood for the cook stove. Each chore strengthened her certainty that she could handle whatever came next. Around midday, she heard Ephraim stirring. She hurried inside to find him trying to sit up. "Easy now," she cautioned, helping him adjust the pillows. "You're still healing." "The ranch," he started to say, but she cut him off. "Is being tended," she assured him. "Everything's done, animals fed, water hauled, wood chopped. You just rest." Ephraim studied her face, noting the quiet determination there. "You've changed," he said softly. Evelyn paused in the act of pouring him water. "How do you mean, you stand straighter? Move with purpose." His eyes held pride as he looked at her. "You've carried us both these past days." Heat crept into her cheeks at the praise, but she couldn't deny the truth of his words. She had carried on because she had to, because this place, this life, mattered too much to let it fall apart. As evening approached, Evelyn sat in the doorway, watching the sunset paint the hills in shades of gold and purple. Behind her, Ephraim dozed in his bed, healing a little more with each passing hour. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. More to herself than to him. About going back to town, facing those people without any papers to prove our claim. The sound from the bed told her Ephraim was awake after all. Reckon that's natural enough. What if they laugh again? The old fear crept into her voice. What if they don't believe me? Courage ain't never being scared, Ephraim said, his voice tired but firm. It's standing up anyway. Standing up because what's right matters more than what's comfortable. Evelyn. Let those words sink in, watching as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Right mattered more than comfortable. Truth mattered more than paper. Slowly, an idea began to take shape in her mind. Rising from the doorway, she went to the trunk where she kept her few belongings. Her best dress lay folded there, plain but clean, with only one small tear near the hem. She took out needle and thread, settling near the lamp to make the repair. As she stitched, her resolve grew stronger. She would go to town tomorrow. Not with papers, but with truth. She would speak of her father's claim, of his dreams for this land. She would testify to what was right, even if her voice shook doing it. The dress repair finished. Evelyn laid it out carefully for morning. She added her mother's old brooch, the one thing she had left of her, and her cleanest apron. Then she stepped out onto the porch, letting the night air cool her face. Stars scattered across the dark sky like diamonds on velvet. The same stars that had watched over her father as he filed his claim, over Ephraim as he built this ranch, over her own journey from unwanted orphan to someone who belonged. Gripping the porch rail, Evelyn lifted her chin. Tomorrow, she whispered too. The starlit night, I'll speak. The words felt like a vow, a promise to herself and to all that she held dear. A coyote called from the distant hills, and a cool breeze carried the scent of pine and sage. This was home now, her home, and she would fight for it with the strongest weapons she possessed, truth and testimony. Inside, Ephraim's quiet breathing mingled with the night sounds. Out here under the vast sky, Evelyn felt her fear begin to transform into something else, something that felt almost like wings. Dawn painted the eastern sky in soft pinks and golds as Evelyn finished saddling the brown mare. Her hands moved steadily over the leather straps, checking each buckle twice. The morning air held a bite of autumn chill, making her pull her shawl tighter. Behind her, the cabin door creaked. Ephraim stood in the doorway, leaning heavily against the frame. His face was pale, but his eyes were clear and determined. You shouldn't be up, Evelyn scolded gently, turning from the horse. Couldn't let you leave without a proper sending off. He grimaced slightly as he shifted his weight. You remember what to say. Evelyn nodded, though her stomach churned. I'll tell them about Father's claim, about how he filed it proper years before the railroad came. The truth is your weapon, girl. Ephraim's voice was soft but firm. Ain't no paper can change what's right. He raised his hand in blessing, the gesture making Evelyn's throat tight with emotion. Lord, watch over you on this journey, he said simply. Evelyn swung into the saddle, gathering the reins in trembling fingers. The mare shifted beneath her, sensing her tension. From this height, she could see the trail winding down through the pines, leading to Silver Bluff and whatever waited there. I'll be back before dark, she promised. Ephraim nodded. You've got grit, Evelyn. Don't let nobody tell you different. The mare's hooves clip-clopped against the packed earth as Evelyn guided her down the trail. She glanced back once to see Ephraim still standing in the doorway, a tall figure growing smaller with distance. Then the path curved and he was lost from sight. Hours stretched long and quiet. The morning sun climbed higher, filtering through pine branches in dusty shafts of light. Evelyn's mind raced, rehearsing what she would say before the judge. Her heart thundered every time she imagined standing up in that crowded courthouse. Lord, give me strength, she whispered, words carried away by the breeze. Around midday, she passed the Henderson place. Sarah Henderson looked up from her washing, surprise clear on her face at seeing Evelyn riding alone. 2 farms over, old Mr. Peterson paused in his fieldwork, watching her pass with raised eyebrows. Evelyn kept her spine straight, chin lifted. Let them stare. Let them wonder. She wasn't that frightened orphan anymore, shrinking from every glance. The sun was westering when Silver Bluff's buildings came into view. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the afternoon stage was just pulling away from the depot in a cloud of dust. Evelyn's hands tightened on the reins as she guided the mare down the main street. A group of children playing marbles looked up at her approach. One boy pointed, whispering loudly, "Look, it's the big girl from Boone's place." Giggles erupted, cruel and sharp. Evelyn felt the familiar burn of shame rise in her cheeks, but she kept her eyes forward. Their words couldn't hurt her unless she let them. She was here for something bigger than their mockery. Outside the courthouse, she dismounted carefully and tied the mare to the hitching rail. Her legs trembled slightly from the long ride, but she forced them steady. The courthouse steps loomed before her, worn smooth by countless boots. Through the windows, she could see movement inside the afternoon session was in progress. Her heart lurched at the sight of 3 well-dressed men near the front. Railroad men with their stolen papers and bought justice. Evelyn smoothed her skirts with damp palms, touched her mother's brooch for courage, and began climbing the steps. Each one brought her closer to what she had to do. Inside, conversations hushed as heads turned toward her. The wooden floor creaked under her feet as she made her way down the center aisle. Judge Callahan looked up from his desk, surprise flickering. Across his weathered features, the railroad men sat smugly in the front row, one of them holding a familiar tin box. Evelyn's hands began to shake at the sight of it, but she took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Your Honor," she said, her voice coming out clearer than she expected. "I have something to say before the court." A heavy silence fell over the room. Every eye fixed upon her, some curious, some hostile, some merely wondering what this large, plain girl could possibly have to say that mattered. Evelyn stood straight and tall, feeling the weight of her father's truth settling on her shoulders, like a mantle. She opened her mouth to speak, ready to tell them everything about her father's dream, about his proper claim, about the right that no amount of stolen papers could erase. The afternoon sun slanted through high windows, casting long shadows across the courthouse floor. In that moment of suspended silence, Evelyn felt stronger than she ever had before. She was ready to speak her piece, no matter what came after. Evelyn stood before the packed courtroom, her heart hammering against her ribs. Judge Callahan leaned forward, his stern face expectant. "Speak your piece, miss." Drawing a deep breath, Evelyn lifted her chin. "My father, Thomas McKinnon, filed water rights on Silver Bluff Creek in 1872. Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with each word. "He worked that land honest, marking the watercourse and registering his claim proper." Scattered laughter rippled through the crowd. Someone coughed. "Liar." The railroad men smirked from their bench, one of them tapping the stolen tin box with confident fingers. But Evelyn pressed on, her voice carrying clear to the rafters. "My father marked that creek with Mr. Jensen witnessing him that used." To run the mercantile, she turned, scanning the faces. And old Samuel Tucker was there too, helping survey the course. A murmur went through the room. In the back, Tucker's weathered face appeared, his expression thoughtful. The judge raised his gavel for silence. "Tell us more about this filing, Miss McKinnon," Judge Callahan said. His tone measured. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, remembering her father's stories. It was spring thaw. The creek was running high that year. Father and Mr. Jensen walked the whole length, marking the bends where it crossed what's now Ephraim Boone's land. She opened her eyes, meeting the judge's gaze. They filed the paperwork on April 12, 1872. I remember because it was my birthday. The railroad's lawyer stood, adjusting his vest with practiced smoothness. Your Honor, this is purely fiction. We have the only legal claim to those water rights, dated 1865. He gestured to the tin box. Judge Callahan turned his attention to the lawyer. Show me these documents. The lawyer brought forth the papers, the ones stolen. During the ambush, Evelyn's throat tightened at the sight of them, stained now with Ephraim's blood. The judge studied the papers carefully, his brow furrowing. These dates appear altered. He looked up sharply. And the witness signatures are unfamiliar to me, if I may, Your Honor. A gravelly voice spoke from the back of the room. Samuel. Tucker rose slowly to his feet, his lined face serious. What the girl says is true. I was there that spring day, helped Tom McKinnon myself mark those water rights. Another voice joined in. That's right. Mrs. Jensen, the merchant's widow, stood from her seat. My herald witnessed it, wrote it in his ledger that very day. I still have that book at home. More voices rose, old settlers remembering Thomas McKinnon's work on the creek. The railroad. Men shifted uneasily in their seats as one by one. Respected townspeople confirmed Evelyn's words. Judge Callahan rapped his gavel, restoring order. He fixed the railroad lawyer with a stern look. These documents you presented show signs of tampering. Furthermore, multiple witnesses corroborate Miss McKinnon's account of an earlier filing. He straightened in his chair. I hereby declare the railroad's current claim invalid pending full investigation. The lawyer started to protest, but the judge cut him off. Miss McKinnon's testimony is deemed credible, supported by reliable witnesses. He looked directly at Evelyn. The court recognizes your father's prior claim to Silver Bluff Creek water rights. Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes, but she blinked them back. Her legs trembled beneath her skirts, yet she remained standing tall. The room had fallen silent. Not the silence of mockery she'd known all her life, but the silence of respect. The railroad men stormed out, their boot heels angry on the wooden floor. But Evelyn hardly noticed. One by one, townspeople approached her, old Samuel Tucker clasping her hand, Mrs. Jensen hugging her tight. Others offering quiet words of support or simply nodding in acknowledgement. For the first time in her life, Evelyn stood in a crowd without shame. She had spoken truth, and truth had given her strength. Her voice, so long silenced by cruel laughter, had carried weight at last. The water rights were safe. Ephraim's land was safe as afternoon sun slanted through the courthouse windows. Evelyn felt something shift inside her, like a heavy door swinging open to let in light. She was no longer just the big girl from the orphanage. She was Thomas McKinnon's daughter, and she had found her voice. The railroad men stormed from the courthouse, boots thundering down the wooden steps. Their faces burned red with shame as they mounted their horses and spurred away in a cloud of dust. Inside, Judge Callahan gathered his papers with careful precision. Miss McKinnon, he said, his stern face softening. The court will begin tracing the original records immediately. Once we locate your father's filing in the territorial office, we'll restore rightful ownership to you. He adjusted his spectacles. What those men did, stealing documents, attempting fraud that won't go unpunished. Evelyn nodded, still trembling from her testimony. Around her, the crowd's whispers had changed. Gone were the cruel jests and mocking laughter. Now people spoke in hushed, respectful tones about the orphan girl who had saved Boone's Ranch and exposed the railroad schemes. Never would have thought it. She heard someone murmur, "That quiet thing, standing up to those railroad bullies. Shows you can't judge by looking," another replied. Girls got her daddy's spine after all. Evelyn gathered her shawl, preparing to leave. As she moved toward the door, several townswomen who had never before acknowledged her existence stepped forward. Mrs. Peterson, the baker's wife, who once shooed her away from the shop window, touched her arm gently. "You did well in there, child," she said, her eyes kind. "Wait a moment." She hurried to her wagon and returned with a wrapped bundle. "Fresh apple pie for your journey home. You share it with Mr. Boone now." Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes as she accepted the gift. "Thank you, ma'am. I'm much obliged." More women gathered around, offering small kindnesses, a pat on the shoulder, a word of praise, even a quick embrace from old Mrs. Jensen. These same women had once turned away, pretending not to see when others mocked her size. Now they smiled, included her, saw her worth. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street. Evelyn untied her horse, tucking the pie carefully into her saddlebag. Her hands shook slightly as she mounted, still overwhelmed by the day's events. The mare shifted beneath her, eager to head home. The ride back stretched long through the cooling evening. Evelyn watched shadows lengthen across the trail, listening to birds call their sunset songs. Her heart felt lighter than it ever had, despite the weight of exhaustion settling in her bones. She thought of Ephraim, waiting at the ranch, hoping. He was strong enough to sit up and hear her news. The sun had nearly set when she finally spotted smoke rising from the cabin's chimney. As she rode into the yard, her heart leaped. There was Ephraim, sitting upright in the rocking chair on the porch. He looked pale, with a blanket across his lap, but his eyes were clear and alert. Evelyn nearly fell, dismounting in her haste. She ran up the steps, words tumbling out. "The judge believed me. The railroad's claim is invalid." And people stood up, Mr. Tucker and Mrs. Jensen and others. They remembered Papa's filing. She caught her breath. "The judge says once they trace the records, the water rights will be restored proper." Ephraim's weathered face creased in a smile. "Told you," he said softly. "It's the truth inside you that gives strength, not just papers." He shifted in his chair, wincing slightly at the movement. "Heard you face down that whole courthouse? I was scared something awful," Evelyn admitted, settling onto the porch step. "But I kept thinking of what you said about courage." And then she described how the townspeople had supported her testimony, how the railroad men had fled in disgrace, how the women had shown kindness afterward. "Mrs. Peterson even gave me a pie to share," she added, retrieving the wrapped bundle from her saddlebag. "Well now," Ephraim said, "that calls for celebration." He started to rise, but Evelyn quickly pressed him back. "You stay put. I'll fetch plates and the lamp." Inside, she moved through the familiar kitchen, gathering what they needed. How different it felt from that first nervous night weeks ago. Then she had been an unwanted burden, certain she would be sent to sleep in the barn. Now she moved with purpose, belonging in every corner of this home. Soon they sat together in the porches, gathering darkness, sharing pie by lamplight. The flame cast a warm glow on their faces as crickets began their evening song. Ephraim ate. Slowly, his strength clearly limited, but his eyes were bright with pride. "You did more than save the water rights today," he said, finally. "You showed them all who you truly are." Evelyn felt tears threatening again. All her life, she had been the big girl, the burden, the one nobody wanted. But Ephraim had seen something else in her that day at the auction. He hadn't just rescued her. He had chosen her, believed in her worth when she couldn't see it herself. "I never thought I'd have this," she whispered, gazing out at the darkening yard, their yard. A real home. Someone who, she struggled to find the words. "Someone who sees you," Ephraim finished quietly. "Well, that makes two of us. Been alone a long time myself." He reached over, patting her hand. "Reckon God knows what he's about, bringing two lonely souls together." They sat in comfortable silence as stars began pricking through the purple evening sky. The pie was sweet, the air was cool, and Evelyn felt peace settle over her like a familiar quilt. She wasn't just rescued anymore. She was chosen, valued, home. The autumn wind carried news across Silver Bluff County faster than any telegraph. Within days of Evelyn's courthouse testimony, word spread about the orphan girl who had faced down the railroad men and saved Boone's ranch. The story grew with each telling how she had stood tall before the judge, how her words had brought truth to light, how the townswomen had embraced her. Afterward, the first visitors arrived early one morning while Evelyn was feeding chickens. The Tucker's wagon rattled up the drive. Raising dust, Mrs. Tucker climbed down carrying a basket of fresh-baked bread and preserves. "Brought you something for your table," she said, eyes downcast. "And, well, I wanted to say I'm sorry for how folks treated you before, including myself." Evelyn accepted the basket with trembling hands. "Thank you, ma'am. That's mighty kind." More neighbors followed throughout the week. The Jensens brought a quilt. The Petersons arrived with more pies. Even gruff old Mr. Wilson rode up on his spotted horse, hat in hand, muttering awkward words about how he might have judged wrong at first. Each visitor was received in the ranch house parlor, where Ephraim sat in his armchair, still recovering, but growing stronger daily. He watched with quiet satisfaction as Evelyn served coffee and spoke with growing confidence to their guests. The girl who had once shrunk from every glance now moved with purpose, belonged in every corner of the home. One evening after the visitors had gone, Ephraim called Evelyn to his desk. The leather-bound ranch ledger lay open, its pages filled with his careful script recording years of cattle counts, supply purchases, and profit figures. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair beside him. "Got something important to discuss." Evelyn perched nervously on the wooden seat, smoothing her skirts. The lamplight caught the silver threading through Ephraim's dark hair as he dipped his pen in ink. "Been thinking," he continued, "about what you did for this ranch. Standing up in that courthouse, facing down those railroad men. Weren't just my land you saved, it was yours too, by right of your father's claim." He turned the ledger toward her. "Reckon it's time to make that official." Evelyn's eyes widened as she saw what he had written, a formal declaration naming her Konar of the Boone Ranch, with equal rights to all property and profits. "Oh no, I couldn't," she protested, pushing the ledger away. "I'm just a girl, and you've already given me so much." "You're the one who saved us," Ephraim said firmly. "Could have lost everything if not for your courage." Besides, his voice softened. "This place needs more than one person to keep it running right. Been trying to do it alone too long." He held out the pen. Evelyn stared at it, remembering all the times she had been told she was worthless, unwanted, too big to be loved. But Ephraim's steady gaze held no mockery, only respect and something warmer, like family. With trembling fingers, she took the pen. Her signature wavered slightly, but grew stronger with each letter, just as she had. When she finished, Ephraim sprinkled sand to dry the ink, then closed the ledger with a satisfying thump. "There now," he said. "It's proper and legal." That evening, they celebrated with a special supper. Evelyn roasted a chicken with potatoes and carrots from their garden. The savory smells filled the cabin as she set the table with their best dishes, the ones her careful hands had never broken despite her early clumsiness. Ephraim said grace, his deep voice grateful. "Lord, we thank you for this food, this home, and the family you've given us." He looked up, meeting Evelyn's tear-bright eyes across the table. "Amen." Their laughter came easier now, filling the once quiet cabin with warmth. They shared stories over supper, Ephraim telling tales of his early ranching days, Evelyn describing the looks on the railroad men's faces when the judge believed her testimony. After the dishes were done, Evelyn settled in her favorite chair by the fire with her darning basket. The flames cast dancing shadows as she mended socks, humming softly an old hymn her father had loved. Ephraim sat nearby, whittling a piece of pine and listening contentedly. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall. Delicate flakes drifted past the window, gradually coating the yard in white. Evelyn paused in her work, watching the gentle transformation. "I belong," she whispered, so quietly she thought no one could hear. But Ephraim looked up from his whittling eyes crinkling. With understanding, the fire crackled, sending sparks up the chimney. Snow continued falling, blanketing their land in peace. Inside the warm cabin, once lonely souls had found their home in each other. The first warm breeze of spring swept through Silver Bluff County, carrying the sweet scent of meadow grass and promise. Winter's grip loosened its hold on the land, revealing tender green shoots pushing through dark soil. At the Boone Ranch, life stirred with renewed vigor. Evelyn stood in the freshly tilled garden, her strong hands working the earth. She had expanded the plot this year, adding 3 new rows for beans and squash. The morning sun warmed her shoulders as she planted seeds with careful precision. From nearby came the gentle lowing of cattle. Their herd had weathered the winter well, with more calves than they dared hope for. The creek that had caused so much trouble now flowed clean and strong, its waters life-giving. Evelyn paused in her work to watch it sparkle, remembering how close they'd come to losing it all. But those dark days were past. Now the water nourished their land freely, a blessing they shared with grateful neighbors. Looking fine, Ephraim called from the corral where he worked with a young colt. His recovery was complete. No trace remained of the bullet wound that had nearly taken him. He moved with his old strength, breaking horses and working cattle as if he'd never been hurt. Evelyn smiled, pride warming her chest. "Reckon we'll have more vegetables than we can eat this summer. Then we'll share the bounty," he replied, his voice carrying easily across the yard. "Lord provides enough for all." The spring days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Evelyn rode fence lines with Ephraim, checking for winter damage and making repairs. Her seat in the saddle was sure now, her hands capable with tools. When branding time came, she worked alongside the hired hands without hesitation, helping to hold calves and apply the hot iron. The cowboys who had once whispered and snickered now treated her with quiet respect. They'd seen her prove herself through winter storms and spring mud, witnessed her determination to learn every aspect of ranch work. More than once, she'd heard them tell others, "Miss Evelyn, she's worth any 2 hands when there's work to be done." One bright Sunday in late spring, they rode to church in their best clothes. Evelyn wore a new dress she'd sewn herself, the blue cotton complementing her eyes. As they tied their horses outside the whitewashed building, several townspeople called out greetings. "Beautiful morning, Miss Evelyn. Saved you both seats up front. How's that garden coming along?" Inside, sunlight streamed through tall windows as the congregation sang hymns. Evelyn's clear voice joined the others, no longer shy about being heard. During the sermon, she sat straight and tall beside Ephraim, untroubled by the glances that came her way. They held admiration now, not mockery. After the service, Mrs. Peterson approached with an invitation. "We're all gathering at your place for supper tonight, ain't we? Been looking forward to it all week." Evelyn nodded, smiling. "Everything's ready. Made 3 pies yesterday, and the roast is waiting." The afternoon sun was lowering when wagons began arriving at the ranch. Families spilled out, the Petersons, Tuckers, Wilsons, and more. Children ran laughing to see the new calves while their parents gathered on the porch, sharing news and passing around coffee cups. Inside, the cabin glowed with hospitality. Evelyn had spent days preparing, scrubbing floors, polishing windows, baking pies and bread. The big table groaned under dishes brought by guests. fresh butter, preserves, roasted chicken, and more. Every surface gleamed, and vases of early wildflowers brightened the rooms. The same women who had once turned away now crowded Evelyn's kitchen, praising her cooking and begging recipes. Men who'd laughed at the auction block sought advice about cattle and water rights, treating him and his partner with genuine respect. "Never tasted better biscuits," declared old Mrs. Wilson, helping herself 2 seconds. "You've got the touch, girl. And the way you fixed up this place," added young Sarah Tucker. "It's so warm and welcoming. It makes a body feel right at home." Evelyn moved among her guests with quiet confidence, making sure everyone had enough to eat, leading conversations with natural grace. She caught Ephraim watching her once, his eyes bright with pride, and felt her heart swell with gratitude. As twilight deepened, the visitors began to leave, calling their thanks and promising to return soon. Lanterns bobbed down the drive as wagons rolled away, carrying well-fed, contented families home. Finally, only the night's peace remained. Evelyn and Ephraim sat together on the porch, watching stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Air was soft with spring sounds, frogs by the creek, a distant coyote, the rustle of new leaves. "Remember that day at the auction?" Ephraim asked quietly. "They laughed at you, girl. But God don't make mistakes. You were the answer I needed." Evelyn felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy, not shame. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing worth in me when no one else did." "Worth was always there," he replied. "Just needed someone to believe in it. Now look at you running this ranch like you were born to it, making it a real home again." She wiped her eyes, smiling. "It is home, more than I ever dreamed of having." They sat a while longer in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds and feeling the rightness of everything that had brought them here. Finally, Evelyn rose and went inside. She moved through the rooms that had become so dear to her, straightening a chair here, folding a tablecloth there, at last. She blew out the lamp, but the cabin seemed to glow still with the warmth of family, faith, and belonging. Standing in the quiet dark, Evelyn felt no fear of tomorrow. She had found her place, not just a roof over her head, but a true home. Here she was, daughter, partner, and friend. Here her strength was valued, her heart understood. She belonged fully and completely to this land, this home, this family, and whatever future God had planned for them all. Thanks for taking a moment to feel with me. If this story reminded you of what matters, hit subscribe. I'll be here tomorrow, continuing our story.